All right, everyone, get ready for a deep dive. Today, it's all about the Indian independence movement, specifically between 1920 and 1934.
Oh, yeah. That's a really pivotal time.
Yeah, we're going to be focusing on the aftermath of Gandhi's non-cooperation movement. We've got some excerpts from a history textbook to help us navigate this period.
Sounds good.
So, expect a roller coaster of political debates, revolutionary action, and some pretty drastic shifts in ideology.
I think what's fascinating about this period is that it really lays bare the internal struggles. You know, a nation on the brink of a huge transformation. Picture this. It's 1922. The non-cooperation movement comes to a sudden end.
Right.
All that momentum, all that hope, it just slams on the brakes. The Indian National Congress, you know, they were at the heart of the movement.
Yeah.
Well, they're left in a state of utter uncertainty. It's like, where do you go from here when the path you were on disappears?
It's got to be, that's a great question. What was the, impact on the people? You know, especially the younger generation who were so involved, so invested.
Yeah.
Was it just massive disillusionment, betrayal, maybe even a push towards, more extreme solutions?
I can imagine, yeah, those emotions were definitely running high.
Yeah.
The textbook actually shows us how this internal turmoil resulted in two main factions emerging within the Congress.
Yeah.
The Swarajists and the No-Changers.
All right, let's break down these two groups because they represent two completely different approaches to gaining independence.
Right.
The Swarajists, let's start with them. They were all about engaging with the British legislative councils. Is it kind of like a, if you can't beat them, join them kind of strategy?
Kind of.
But with this goal of changing or dismantling the system from within.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay.
Figures like C.R. Das and Motilal Nehru, they led this group. And they weren't, naive about the challenges of working within a colonial system, but they truly believed that by entering these councils, they could disrupt things, expose the flaws in the system, and maybe, force the British to actually hear Indian voices. It was a gamble, though.
It was a gamble. Were they truly optimistic? Or was it more of a calculated move? Buy some time, keep the spirit of resistance going while they kind of figure out the next steps?
Yeah, that's a question historians are still debating today.
Yeah.
But what we do know is that this approach was a dilemma for the Swarajists. Did cooperating with the British somehow legitimize their rule?
Right.
Or was it a necessary evil?
To get to the end goal.
Exactly.
Okay. Then, on the opposite end of the spectrum, you've got the No-Changers.
Right.
As their name suggests. They weren't interested in playing the British game at all.
No, not at all. Figures like C. Rajapalachari and Vallabha Patel, they were leading this faction.
Okay.
Their argument was that entering these councils would just dilute the revolutionary spirit.
Okay.
Compromise the integrity of the whole movement. So their focus was on building a strong foundation for the future. Doing constructive work, promoting Khadi, national education. Think of it as a long game strategy, empowering people from the ground up.
So you have this stark contrast. The Swarajists, ready to work within the system, even risking, being seen as collaborators.
Right.
And the No-Changers focused on building power outside of it. That must created some serious tension within the Congress.
Oh, absolutely. But the thing is, despite their differences, both groups ultimately wanted the same thing, independence.
Okay.
The Swarajists, they went ahead and contested the elections, but they stayed within the Congress.
So it was like a compromise.
Yeah, it was a compromise.
Okay.
It really shows how the movement was able to make space for these different views.
So pragmatism won, in a sense.
Well, in a way, yes. It shows a strategic approach. And, the Swarajists, they actually had some surprising success in the councils. They formed coalitions, disrupted proceedings. They even managed to defeat some government bills. It proved that they could use the system to their advantage. Take the Public Safety Bill of 1928, for example. It was designed to suppress the growing influence of socialist and communist ideas, which, by the way, were gaining traction among the young nationalists.
Right. So even within the Congress, things were changing. So their opposition to this bill shows not only their commitment to civil liberties,
right,
but also that they were aware of the global political trends.
Exactly. It shows that the Indian independence movement wasn't happening in a vacuum. Global events, the success of the Russian Revolution, for example.
Right.
It had a huge impact on how Indian nationalists, especially the younger ones, were thinking.
It makes you wonder, if the Swarajists were so effective at using the system, why didn't this become the dominant strategy?
Well, because it gets a little more complicated.
Okay.
They achieved some wins, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But they also faced some inherent limitations.
Okay.
Their reliance on alliances, it made them vulnerable to shifts in the political landscape.
So playing the political game is risky.
It is. And on top of that, all that focus on legislative maneuvering. It sometimes created a distance between them and the masses.
Okay.
Remember, this was a time of growing social and economic inequality.
Mm-hmm.
And many Indians, especially the younger generation, they were looking for more radical solutions.
So while the Swarajits were busy debating in the councils, a new generation was emerging.
Right.
They wanted more than just independence. They were envisioning a deeper societal transformation, almost like revolutionary seeds were being sown, right?
Absolutely. And that's where our dive takes an even more interesting turn. As the Swarajists and the No-Changers were having their debates, a new wave of radicalism was brewing.
Okay.
It was fueled by global events, socialist ideals, and a growing frustration with the slow pace of change.
We were just talking about this rise of radicalism in India, this mix of socialist ideas and a real sense of urgency.
Yeah.
Now, our textbook mentions the Hindustan Republican Association, later renamed to the Hindustan Socialist Republican Association,
Right.
the HSRA. They were known for some pretty daring actions.
They were.
What made people choose this path? To risk everything for a revolution?
Well, try to imagine. You're a young nationalist, right?
Mm-hmm.
You put your faith in Gandhi's nonviolent movement. You're all in.
Yeah.
And then it's pulled back.
Right.
The frustration, the feeling of being let down, it's understandable why some would turn towards more direct action, even armed struggle.
So not just ideology, but a real, gut reaction to the movement stalling.
Exactly. They were tired of waiting, tired of promises. And don't forget what was happening globally. The Russian Revolution, it showed that even the most powerful empires could fall. It was a powerful example of radical change.
The HSRA, they didn't seem content with just independence.
No.
Even their name, Hindustan Socialist Republican Association, it hints at a much bigger vision.
You're right. They were true revolutionaries in every sense of the word. They didn't just want political freedom. They wanted a complete transformation of society. They wanted to dismantle the power structures and build a new India based on socialist principles, equality, economic justice, ending exploitation.
We talked about the Swarajists working within the system.
Yes.
The HSRA seemed to believe that real change could only come from outside the system, even if it meant using force.
Yes.
The textbook mentions the Kakori train robbery in 1925. Such a daring act, it really captured people's attention. What was the strategy behind that?
Well, they needed money to fund their activities, weapons, save houses, spreading their message. But it was more than just about the money. It was symbolic, a way of showing the British they weren't afraid to directly challenge their power. It embodied that spirit of daring, of sacrifice that defined the HSRA.
It's easy to, romanticize those acts of rebellion.
Yeah.
But we can't forget the risks involved. These were young people putting their lives on the line.
Absolutely. And within the HSRA, there was always this ongoing debate about strategy, about their tactics. Someone like Bhagat Singh, one of their key leaders, he began to question if isolated acts of violence were really effective.
Yeah.
You know.
His shift towards mass mobilization, that feels crucial, like a
Yeah.
turning point in revolutionary thinking. Did he completely abandon the idea of individual heroism? Or was it more of an evolution?
It was an evolution. He realized that those symbolic acts of defiance, they were important, yes, but they weren't enough for lasting change. He saw that real revolution needed the masses to be involved. Workers, peasants, students, everyone who was suffering under colonialism and social injustice. He helped set up the Punjab Naujawan Bharat Sabha, an open wing, to do just that, carry out political work among the youth, peasants, and workers.
So he was moving towards a more inclusive, a grassroots approach, recognizing that the fight for freedom wasn't just about a few brave individuals, it was about empowering the people.
Precisely. And this shift wasn't just about strategy, it came from his deeper commitment to socialist ideals. He believed that a true revolution meant more than just kicking out the British. It meant creating a society where everyone had equal opportunities,
Right.
where everyone had a share in the nation's wealth. His vision went beyond independence. It was about social and economic justice.
That makes me think of the bombing of the Central Legislative Assembly in 1929
Yes.
by Bhagat Singh and Bhatukeshwar Dutt.
Mm.
It wasn't just a random act of violence.
It was a protest,
Sure.
carefully planned. They made sure no one would get hurt. They wanted to shake the British government, make their voices heard, force them to listen to the demands of the people. It was a powerful act of defiance.
It's amazing how they use these unconventional tactics to challenge the system.
Right.
And you're right, it wasn't violence for violence's sake. It was about using whatever tools they had to advance the cause of freedom.
Exactly. It sparked a debate, one that we're still having today. What are the acceptable ways to resist? When is violence justified if it's for a greater good?
Those are huge questions, and ones that every revolution grapples with. The textbook also highlights the Chittagong group in Bengal, led by Surya Sen.
Yes.
They seem to operate a bit differently than the HSRA.
They did. The Chittagong group, they were fascinating. They also believed in armed struggle, but they put a strong emphasis on group action, solidarity. They weren't so focused on individual acts of heroism.
Okay.
They were more about coordinated attacks against symbols of colonial power.
The Chittagong Armory raid in 1930? It sounds like something out of a movie.
Yeah.
This group of revolutionaries taking over 2 armories, raising the Indian flag, even declaring a provisional government.
It was bold, a powerful symbol of resistance. While the raid itself wasn't ultimately successful, it captured the imagination. It inspired a lot of young people, particularly in Bengal, to join the movement.
What else set the Chittagong group apart?
One thing that stands out is the role of women. They weren't just supporters, they were actively involved in planning and carrying out missions, providing shelter, gathering information, even fighting. Figures like Pitalata Wadadar and Kalpana Dutt, they became symbols of revolutionary courage and sacrifice.
It's crucial to highlight the contributions of women, especially in these armed movements. It challenges the narrative that often pushes them to the sidelines.
Absolutely. And unlike some earlier groups who often used a lot of Hindu imagery and symbols, the Chittagong group deliberately moved away from that. It made it easier for Muslims to join them. They recognized that the fight for independence went beyond religion. Surya Sen, he believed that unity was key to achieving their goals.
So they were consciously building a more inclusive movement, one that reflected the diversity of India.
Exactly. And even though they were committed to armed struggle, they weren't just focused on military tactics.
Right.
They understood that real liberation meant addressing the root causes of social and economic injustice. They worked to mobilize peasants and workers, recognizing that their struggles were connected to the fight for independence.
It's incredible how they connected the dots between national liberation and social justice. It wasn't just about kicking out the British. It was about a better future for all Indians.
Their vision was transformative. But we can't forget about the British response. It was swift and brutal.
The textbook talks about villages being burned, fines imposed, prominent figures like Jawaharlal Nehru arrested, just for showing sympathy to the revolutionaries.
Yes, the British were alarmed. They cracked down hard, trying to crush the movement. It shows the immense challenges these revolutionaries faced, the sacrifices they made for their ideals.
And we're back, continuing our exploration of this incredible period in the Indian independence movement. It's a time when revolutionary energy was surging, really shaking the foundations of British control.
It's been quite the journey, right? We've seen how the limits of nonviolence, global events, the yearning for a just society, they all pushed many towards radical action.
We've looked at groups like the HSRA, the Chittagong group, their acts of defiance, their sacrifices, and how their beliefs changed. But their stories, as powerful as they are, they're part of a bigger shift. What other ideological changes were happening in these revolutionary movements?
One major shift was the embrace of socialist ideals. We see this in Bhagat Singh's journey, from those individual acts of heroism to advocating for mass mobilization and social justice. He, like many others, realized that true freedom wasn't just about swapping British rule for another elite group in charge.
So they were thinking about a much deeper transformation, not just who's in power, but changing the whole system itself.
Exactly. They were talking about a society with a fair distribution of wealth and resources, where the exploitation of workers and peasants ends, where every Indian can live with dignity and freedom. It was a radical vision, a dream of a truly equal India.
That kind of vision must have been so appealing, especially to those who had been pushed to the margins, but it also seems like a huge challenge. How do you put those big ideals into action?
That's the constant struggle revolutionaries faced. There were different paths being explored. The HSRA, as we talked about, they believed in armed struggle to dismantle the colonial state, to make way for a socialist revolution. Others, like Bhagat Singh in his later years, emphasized mass mobilization and grassroots organizing. They believed that true change had to come from the bottom up by giving people the power to shape their own future.
So a shift from a few revolutionaries to igniting that revolutionary spirit in everyone. It reminds me of the Punjab Naujawan Farhat Sabha, which Bhagat Singh helped create, reaching out to youth, peasants, workers, educating them, organizing them, making them active in the movement.
It was about building that collective power, showing people they could be the ones to make change happen. And this wasn't just the HSRA or Bhagat Singh. Think about the Chittagong group. They focused on collective action, building a movement that went beyond religious lines. They knew that solidarity and unity were crucial against the British Empire.
It's fascinating how these different revolutionary groups, even with their different tactics, were all working towards that shared goal, a free and just India.
That shared belief in social justice, in tearing down those deeply rooted systems of oppression and exploitation, that's what truly sets them apart. They knew that political independence without social and economic justice wouldn't be enough.
It's a reminder that revolutions aren't just about changing who's in control, but about changing the very foundation of society.
Absolutely. And we have to remember the incredible courage it took to challenge the British Empire. Knowing the brutal response that awaited them, the textbook describes the burning of villages, heavy fines, imprisonment, even for those who just showed support for the revolutionaries. Even with that constant threat, they persisted, driven by their unwavering belief in a better future.
It speaks to the power of their convictions, that deep belief in an ideal, that they were willing to sacrifice so much for a cause they might not even see succeed in their lifetime.
Exactly. And while these revolutionary movements didn't reach their goals right away, their impact was huge. They helped radicalize a generation, planted the seeds of social and economic justice, and showed that the British Empire, despite its power, wasn't unbeatable. Their legacy continued, inspiring future generations and ultimately paving the way for India's independence in 1947.
As we wrap up this deep dive into the revolutionary movements of the 1920s, what are the key things you want our listeners to take away? What can we learn from these individuals and their commitment to a free and just India?
I think the biggest takeaway is that revolutions are rarely simple or predictable. They're messy, complex, full of contradictions and different visions. But they're also driven by incredible passion, this deep desire for a better world. The revolutionaries we've discussed, despite their differences, embodied that spirit. They dared to dream of a different future, and they were willing to fight for it, even against incredible odds. Their story is a testament to the power of ideas, the strength of convictions, and that enduring human spirit that longs for freedom and justice.
Thank you for guiding us through this fascinating and complex period of Indian history. It reminds us that the fight for freedom and equality never really ends. It needs constant attention, courage, and the willingness to challenge the way things are.
And it reminds us that the past isn't really gone. The impact of these revolutionary movements can be felt even today as people around the world continue to fight for a more just and equitable world.
We hope you enjoy this deep dive into the Indian independence movement. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.